Jim Montgomery won his debut in St. Louis, and there's some things we need to discuss about his hiring with the Blues. Plus, is Chris Kreider a trade option? And welcome home, Jake DeBrusk.
You're Locked On Bruins, your daily podcast on the Boston Bruins. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is up, Bruins fans, and welcome back to the Locked On Boston Bruins podcast. I'm your host, Ian McLaren, and this is a daily show where we discuss all things spoke to be. Today is Tuesday, November 26th, and I want to thank you so much for making Locked On Bruins part of your daily routine. Free and available on your favorite podcast app and on YouTube, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your favorite team every single day. And today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Right now, you can get $150 in bonus bets at FanDuel after you place a $5 bet. And if you win that first $5 bet, just visit FanDuel.com to get started. And before we get started with this Tuesday kind of news day episode, we'll talk about Jim Montgomery, St. Louis. The fallout from that continues, as well as Chris Kreider, possibly a trade option for the Bruins, and previewing tonight's game against the Vancouver Canucks. A quick reminder, you can find the podcast on social media at Locked NHL Bruins, and you can find me, my hockey thoughts, dad jokes, at Ian C. McLaren. I am a lifelong Bruins fan. I've been covering this team for various outlets for about 20 years now. Full-time news editor at The Score for 5 years, and have been hosting this podcast since 2019. And as discussed yesterday, Jim Montgomery was snapped up by the St. Louis Blues in record time. And it was interesting listening to the 32 Thoughts podcast on Monday, as Elliot Friedman suggested Monty in St. Louis was kind of always the plan. He said, quote, "If it didn't work out in Boston, this was always going to be the outcome." As a matter of fact, within an hour of the announcement being made, Friedman got calls from two different people who said he had no guts for basically saying that he was going to St. Louis kind of the moment that he was let go by the Boston Bruins, just less than a week ago from this point. Already, Montgomery, hired by the Blues, won his debut last night, 5-2 over the New York Rangers, going with Joel Hofer in net. Perhaps he'll go with it more of a tandem as he did in Boston with Linus Ullmark and Jeremy Swayman. Here's how it kind of played out. Drew Bannister got the coaching job last year on an interim basis when Craig Berube was fired. Bannister did not get the official job until May 7th, just after the Bruins played game one of the second round against the Florida Panthers. So it doesn't take a genius, Friedman said, to figure out what was going on. Doug Armstrong was waiting to see if there was any chance that if the Bruins lost in the first round to the Maple Leafs, would Jim Montgomery become available? It's quite possible, but they did win. They hung on. They won that series, and then Montgomery was not available at this point. Curious to note as well, Doug Armstrong offered Montgomery a 5-year deal. Doesn't believe the Bruins offered 5 years when they were discussing a contract extension. Probably more along the lines of another 3 years. But the biggest thing, it was bigger than the negotiation and the offer. It was also about philosophy, about approach. The coach and the front office were not necessarily on the same page, and everybody started to realize that it was not a long-term match. He said everybody knew the Blues had an eye on Montgomery, one eye on Montgomery, and perhaps Montgomery had one eye on the Blues. The Bruins knew this was possible. Montgomery realized that this other situation was there. If he wasn't happy with the way the Bruins situation was working out, he could potentially go there. And that's exactly the way it unfolded. Not necessarily a surprise to anybody. Now, the question is whether or not the Blues at any point reached out to Montgomery prior to him being let go by the Bruins, if there was any discussions in the summer or earlier this season. There's no reason to believe that's the case, but I guess everybody just kind of knew. Maybe Montgomery knew that the door would be open for him. When he jumped at the Bruins job, Berube was still there, and there was no reason to believe that he was going to be let go anytime soon. And Jim Montgomery did say that Doug Armstrong is obviously someone that's really important to his second chance, referencing his return to hockey after being fired by the Dallas Stars in 2019 for, quote, unprofessional conduct inconsistent with the core values and beliefs of the Stars and the National Hockey League. It was later announced that he had entered a rehab program to deal with alcohol abuse, but he was hired on by Doug Armstrong as an assistant coach and clearly appreciated that opportunity and is happy to be going back to St. Louis. He said when Armstrong called him on Monday, 6 days after being fired by the Bruins, a few days after being fired by the Bruins, he said that it's just crazy and that, being fired on Tuesday, hired on a Sunday, he admitted that when Armstrong called him, he assumed it was just to show support, having previously worked with the club as an assistant coach. But he thought it was just a social call, kind of like, hey, I've been there, keep your head up. But turns out he had a job opportunity for him, and the familiarity that he has with the organization gives him an advantage, and he's able to hit the ground running. And that is exactly what they did last night. Asked how Armstrong persuaded him to take the job so soon after being let go by the Bruins, Montgomery said, quote, the best line that put his hooks into me was when something delicious falls on my plate, I eat. So I guess I was a T-bone that day, Montgomery said. Basically, once Montgomery became available, Armstrong made the move to let go of Drew Bannister and reach out to Montgomery. There's no proof to suggest that there was anything untoward here. It does seem a bit fishy, and it does seem as though Montgomery was keeping an eye on the Blues. The Blues were certainly keeping an eye on him based on the timeline of offering Bannister the head coaching job right after the Bruins beat the Maple Leafs in the playoffs last year. But the moment he became available, Bannister out, Montgomery in, and again, they're off to a 1-0 start in St. Louis. The Bruins off to a 2-0 start under head coach Joe Sacco, so win-win so far. But it's hard to argue that the Blues didn't end up with the better coach here long-term. The Bruins have yet to commit to Joe Sacco. Montgomery getting a 5-year deal in St. Louis, and Bruce Cassidy, of course, before him, Claude Julien before him, all going on to other things very quickly. And funnily enough, Julien, Montgomery now together in St. Louis as Julien is an assistant coach. We'll see if he takes steps to bring in some of his own guys, but you would assume that if he was given the opportunity to do so, he might have tried to bring in some guys from St. Louis. Anyways, that's it for Jim Montgomery. The Bruins, Blues don't play each other again this season until, hey, who knows, maybe in the Stanley Cup final once again. Quite unlikely. But just wanted to kind of tie a bow on that with the comments made by Montgomery on Monday, as well as that insight from Elliot Friedman. Now, speaking of Elliot Friedman, he dropped a bit of a bomb on Monday with respect to the New York Rangers that could have an impact on our Bruins, and we'll discuss that here as the podcast continues. Prize Picks is the best place to play for real money sports action because they have over 10 million members and billions of dollars in awarded winnings. Prize Picks has made daily fantasy sports accessible to all. You just pick more or less on at least two players for a shot to win up to 100 times your cash. You can run your game all season long on Prize Picks. Today is Tuesday, and they have a Taco Tuesday promotion every week that can lead to a big payout. Each Tuesday, Prize Picks discounts select player projections up to 25% to provide even more value for your lineups. Prize Picks is the best way to win real money this hockey season, and all you have to do is download the app, use code LOCKEDONNHL to get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. Again, download the app, use code LOCKEDONNHL, and get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. At Prize Picks, you can run your game all season long. All right, so prior to last night's game between the Blues and the Rangers, and following a loss by the Rangers to the Oilers over the weekend, Elliot Friedman reported that general manager Chris Drury was looking to, or open to, a shakeup, and was open to dealing perhaps veterans Chris Kreider or Jacob Trouba. Now, if that was the case, then the Bruins would likely be quite interested in acquiring the likes of Chris Kreider, a guy who's long been, I think, on their wish list as a scoring power forward. Of course, a Massachusetts boy as well. He's scored at least 36 goals over each of the past 3 seasons, 52 in 21-22, 36 in 22-23, 39 last year. He's got 9 this year in 19 games, but 0 assists to his credit. And the Rangers as a whole, they have Stanley Cup aspirations, but haven't been playing that great this season. And the possibility of sacrificing Kreider could be to Boston's benefit. Those 9 goals would lead the Bruins, and just 3 players have more than Kreider's 9-point total so far this season. Kreider was held out of the lineup last night because of an upper body injury. Who knows if that's actually the case or if they're looking to perhaps try to move him. But he would be a fantastic addition to this team. The Rangers are 12-7-1. It looks pretty good, but they have dropped 3 in a row now: Calgary, Edmonton, and St. Louis. And that's enough for Chris Drury to look to shake things up. They've got a good young core. Their kids are playing very well. But Kreider is a guy that they may be willing to sacrifice. Now, he does have a couple years remaining on his contract. He signed through 2027 with a cap hit of $6.5 million, which is a pretty big chunk of change, and certainly more than the Bruins are able to afford right now with just about $1.4 million in cap space. So there would have to be money going out. But Sweeney did say that he's willing to rearrange some things in order to shake up his own roster if that is indeed necessary. Kreider, again, 2 seasons beyond this one at $6.5 million. If you're looking at shaking things up from a Bruins perspective, then you'd have to probably look at moving Charlie Coyle, who's got 1 year remaining past this one on a deal that pays him $5.25. Pavel Zacha has 2 years remaining after this one at $4.75. You're likely not trading Lindholm or Pasternak, both of whom have no move clauses. Coyle has some no trade clause and no movement clauses that they would have to deal with, but it would have to be Coyle at the very least going out, but that's not going to get it done either. You'd have to move. Maybe they would take, I don't even know what it would take to acquire Kreider, still a valuable asset, but seemingly declining and with quite a bit of term left on his contract. So it'd have to be Coyle plus, who knows, Morgan Geekie, John Beecher, maybe they'd want back. I don't know what it would cost, but it's a guy that the Bruins probably would have an eye on if indeed he were to become available. And indeed, all indications are that he could be had. Now, Don Sweeney does like Kreider as a player, and the Bruins were linked to him a few years ago before he signed that extension with the Rangers. The Bruins have a clear hole in their top six. But the question, of course, is whether or not they have the assets to get something done. He's obviously an attractive player. He's a guy they could use in their top six who would bring some scoring punch as well as some physicality to the lineup. But what do they really have to offer? You're probably not trading your first round pick this year after having to sacrifice Linus Ullmark to get in the first round this past year. They don't have a second round pick this year. That was part of that was traded to Washington in the past. Charlie Coyle's not going to get it done unless the Rangers are really desperate to make a shakeup. But he's not on the same level as Chris Kreider. They could maybe pop in Georgi Merkulov or sacrifice Fabian Lysell. Who knows what it would take to get things done, but it's clear that Don Sweeney would be interested. They do have a trade history in the past. Remember the Ryan Lindgren, Rick Nash trade. Who knows if they'd want to trade him within the conference. So there's a lot up in the air with regards to Chris Kreider and the Boston Bruins, but it's certainly a possibility and certainly something that Don Sweeney would, at the very least, explore the possibility of pulling off. So certainly Don Sweeney will take a look. I don't know if the Rangers would want to trade him in the conference against the potential playoff opponent, but he would certainly be a great addition to this team, and I'd be willing to trade pretty much anyone outside the core guys for his services, including Charlie Coyle, maybe even Fabian Lysell, to be honest, because it doesn't look as though he is, well, it's too early to write him off, but if you can get a Kreider now who fits in with the current core and keeps the window open even just a little bit, why not? Why not do it? The Bruins play the Vancouver Canucks tonight. They will welcome Jake DeBrusk, Danton Heinen back, and we will preview that game here as the podcast continues. FanDuel is America's #1 sportsbook, and you can get in on this week's Thanksgiving action with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. New customers can bet $5 and get $150 in bonus bets if you win. The FanDuel Sportsbook app gives you everything you need to place live bets on the NFL all in one place. Also, NHL, NBA. When you get a hunch in the middle of the game, you can check the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you place your bets. Check the over-under for tonight's Bruins-Canucks game. Put $5 down. If you win, you'll get $150 in bonus bets. Visit FanDuel.com to join today. That's FanDuel.com. Never waste a hunch and make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. Big game at TD Garden tonight as the Vancouver Canucks will be in town. The Stanley Cup rivalry is pretty much well in the past now, but there is a new twist on this rivalry with Jake DeBrusk now being a member of the Canucks after having signed as a free agent this past summer. And he is coming in pretty hot into this one after having a 2-goal, 1-assist outburst on Saturday against Linus Ullmark and the Ottawa Senators. He's now in a tie for second on the team in scoring behind Connor Garland and Elias Pettersson, both of whom have 15 points. Jake DeBrusk at 13. Now, prior to this season, I had said that I thought Jake DeBrusk would have more points than anybody on the Bruins not named David Pastrnak. He got off to a bit of a slow start in Vancouver, which is understandable because of his coming over to moving across the continent, new city, new teammates, new room, new vibes. He's only 2 back of Brad Marchand and in 3 fewer games played. So he's on track to perhaps prove me right in that regard. And the Bruins do miss Jake DeBrusk. Make no mistake about it. You've seen the penalty kill struggle. You've seen the scoring struggle, the power play. He's a guy who can bring so much to the table for any team, and you can be sure that he's going to be looking to make a mark in his return to Boston. Now, I expect a nice tribute ovation for Jake DeBrusk. It's clear that it wasn't just necessarily his decision to move on, although there, of course, is that trade request history. The Bruins prioritized signing Elias Lindholm, Nikita Zadorov over retaining DeBrusk's services. You can argue that perhaps they would have been better off taking Zadorov's money and re-signing Jake DeBrusk. Although Zadorov, to his credit, did look a bit better the other night under Joe Sacco. Now, the Canucks, they're 10-6-3 coming into this one. They are coming off a win over Ottawa. Prior to that, though, they lost 2 in a row, Nashville and the New York Rangers, 6-4 over their last 10. The Bruins 5-3-2 over their last 10, so steps in the right direction here. And of course, 2 wins in a row, 1 over Utah and 1 over Detroit. Pettersson, 6 points over the past 5 games to lead them in scoring. The Bruins' top point getter over the past 5 games. I don't know if you'll guess this, but it's actually Mason Lohrei with 4 assists. Trent Frederick leads the way with 2 goals, that 2-goal game last week over the past 5 games. The line of Pettersson, DeBrusk, and Kiefer Sherwood has really been rolling for them. That's going to be a key matchup to keep an eye on tonight. Now, we'll see if Montgomery goes with Korpisalo or Swayman. It's the first of a back-to-back. The Bruins play again tomorrow night against the New York Islanders. Swayman coming off a strong game in Detroit, but he's still only at .887 for save percentage this season. Korpisalo, .911, coming off a shutout over Utah. So perhaps who knows what the situation will be there in net. For the Canucks, they have Kevin Lankinen, who's got a .901 save percentage, 9-3-2 record. Arturs Silovs 1-3-1 with an .857 save percentage. The Canucks power play ranks 15th in the NHL, 20.3% success rate. The Bruins are on a 2-game streak in which they've scored a power play goal, and they have risen out of the bottom of the NHL. They're now 31st in the power play. So improvements there under Joe Sacco. Penalty kill, pretty much similar. Canucks at 16th, 78.6% success rate. The Bruins are 19th with a 77.9% success rate. The Bruins slightly better in the faceoff circle. They're still dead last in the NHL, though, in goals 4 per game at 2.32. The Canucks, 3.21. Their defense is also allowing 3.21. The Bruins, 3.18. So could be looking at like a 3-2 game here in favor of the Canucks if these numbers stay consistent with what's been the case so far this season for both teams. A big game tonight. Again, we kind of skipped over the power rankings today because of the Monty update, Chris Kreider. But if we're looking at the Atlantic Division, the Bruins are in 5th in terms of point percentage behind Toronto, Tampa Bay, who's coming off a massive win over Colorado last night. The Panthers are struggling a bit. They've lost 4 in a row. They've dropped down to 3rd in point percentage in the Atlantic. The Sabres up there in 4th. The Bruins, 523 now, point percentage, 23 points in 22 games. Still rocking that -19 goal differential, which is 3rd worst in the conference, 2nd worst in the Atlantic. The Canucks, they are, let's see here, 3rd in the Pacific in point percentage. They have a -1 goal differential. So they're kind of struggling as well, but starting to find their way as Pettersson, DeBrusk find their groove as a tandem that they were kind of counting on to be successful. Anyways, that's it for today's episode of Locked On Boston Bruins, my friends. Thank you so much for taking the time to listen. Please do subscribe on your favorite podcast app and on YouTube. I will likely not be recording a podcast tomorrow as I'll be traveling to Ottawa to be with my mom as she's undergoing a round of chemo this week on Thursday. I will record on Thursday afternoon while she's resting to recap tonight's game and tomorrow's game against the Islanders. And then I'll be back later in the week to discuss Friday's game against the Pittsburgh Penguins. If there is anything breaking, I'll be sure to jump on YouTube and record a short. So please do subscribe there for all the very latest on the Boston Bruins. I'll try to do a quick game recap up there as well. Just a reminder to take care of yourselves, friends. Take care of each other. It can be a difficult time this year for people around the holidays. So please do take care of yourselves and just do something to enjoy your day. Get outside, go for a walk, whatever it takes. I really appreciate all the support for sure. And please do check out Locked On Fantasy next. All the latest tips from Steal and Flip to help you win your league. And it's all part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your favorite teams every single day.